I don't know what we think we're going to change in Afghanistan. We lost 22,000, lost or wounded 22,500 Americans in Afghanistan over the course of our term there in the war, spending over $2 trillion. We're just going to keep on spending because somehow we think it's going to get better. And if you're wondering who's in charge of Afghanistan getting the money, and that money I just mentioned, the $697 million is on top of, and is in addition to the weekly to every 10-day shipments in cash of $40 to $80 million. Afghanistan is ruled by folks named Sarayuddin Haqqani. The Haqqani network mean anything to anybody in the room? How about Abdullah bin Laden, who gets some of that money?
Mr. Roman, are you aware that we are sending $40 million a week to the Taliban?
Yes, sir.
Can you name other instances of foreign aid going to terrorist organizations?
We have assisted al-Shabaab in Somalia. There's been instances of the Hamzi network in Sudan, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, Kataib al-Hezbollah, Hayat Tahrir al-Shams in Syria. Dozens of terror organizations have received indirect assistance from U.S. foreign aid.
You know, over the last 3 years, I've been saying on my platform that the United States has been involved in funding terrorism in Africa and all over the world. The things that they claim to be fighting, they have been solely responsible for funding it. And it's not just the United States, it's equally France, Britain, the so-called Western elite who stand against terrorism. Over the last 3 years, I've been saying this on my platform, sounding out this. And now we have discovered that a sitting U.S. congressman, Scott Perry, broke the news, made headway a couple of months ago. This was when the Trump administration suspended all USAID funds. It's still an ongoing investigation. And I thought that I would talk about this because this ties to Burkina Faso and the recent assassination plot against their president, Ibrahim Traoré, and also conversation around, AFCOM, U.S. African Command, General Lanley. So all of these things all tied together. And for the life of me, I don't know who to blame when it comes to this story. I don't know who exactly to be more outraged at. Is it the United States, who it's not confirmed? It's not news to me, but it's not confirmed that they have been behind the funding of all the terrorism, Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, ISIS, Boko Haram, all over the world. They've been the one funding it. So are they the ones you get mad at? Or the countries and their leaders who have been receiving this funding to allow the United States to destabilize their countries so they can broker a deal to have military bases in those countries? Who exactly are you really to get really outraged at? That is the fundamental question. That is the fundamental question, right? Are the taxpayers in the United States, as it has now become exposed that the funding obviously has been on the backs of the taxpayers in the United States, is their money, are they to be outraged? Yes. Equally as the citizens of those countries that are suffering at the hands of terrorism, right? Who have now been terrorizing their countries. Now we now see that the United States has been funding these groups to cause mayhem in these places so that way they can benefit a few elites like the arms dealers, gun manufacturers, NRAs. You know, it's one of those things that should upset anyone that hears this. And frankly, I don't know why we're not outraged at this. Here's a headline for you. And I'll put this on the screen for you guys to see it. It says, House Speaker stands down probe of CSOs over USAID Boko Haram funding link. This is the House Speaker over there in Nigeria. It goes down here to say the Speaker of the House of Representatives has intervened in the actions taken by the ad hoc committee investigating Nigeria's civil society organizations, CSOs, and international development partners over alleged link between USAID funding and the terrorist group Boko Haram, asking the ad hoc committee to stand down its probe. This decision comes after sustained concern raised by NGOs regarding the committee's broad and intrusive demand, which they argue amounts to an overreach and an infringement on their constitutional rights to operate. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine government officials who should be investigating a credible allegation? At least I would think it's a credible allegation, especially when it's coming from a U.S. congressman who's probing what his country is using money to do in terms of funding terrorism in another country. When a such allegation comes from a sitting congressman, you would think the country who is affected by such thing will investigate this. But they said, no, stand down. Don't worry about it. So again, I ask a question. Who are we to be more outraged at? The United States, whom we now have credible evidence that they are funding terrorism and have been funding terrorism based on testimony, based on credible testimony by the directors who operate the USAID funds, by sitting congressmen? Are they the ones we should be angry at? Or the countries who are affected by this jihadists and Islamic terrorists who are terrorizing their countries? It's a question. Because I have all the blame to go and to attribute to the United States, because it's something that we've always talked about. That this country stands up and stands in front of terrorism and say, hey, we're fighting terrorism. It's something you hear all over the news. It's something that you attribute the United States to, that they fight terrorism all over the world, right? Most people would agree with you that that's what they stand for. But to now find out and learn that that is just a mouthpiece, that covertly they've been funding the same groups they say they fight. At least now we know what AFCOM is all about. I mean, I released a video, remember not too long ago? I released a video in terms of the founding of AFCOM during the Bush administration. This is back in 2007, when that whole organization was founded. And the whole sole purpose of that organization, AFCOM, which is the acronym for U.S. Africa Command, the whole sole purpose of that was to loot and exploit the resources of Africa under the guise of fighting terrorism. Now we know why that was all founded, and why Michael Langley has been stationed in these African bases. Why it's his sole mission to ensure that Africa is destabilized. Now we now know why they've been wanting to assassinate the likes of Captain Ibrahim Traoré. He knows the BS behind the so-called war on terrorism, the so-called U.S. bases in his country and many other West African countries. Which is why he and many around the Sahel region decide to say, hey, France, U.S., y'all need to go. Y'all need to go. Because you guys are funding. You guys are stoking this whole thing. I've been saying this on this channel. But then what's equally upsetting, while we look at the United States, is to then find out that you have House speakers from various countries, in this case, one in Nigeria, telling them to stand down on any probe. Don't look into this. I want to play you this interview, which I think is very telling. It's by Arise TV, which is a news media in Nigeria, and it's an interview by Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, who was a former foreign affairs minister. I want you to hear what he had to say. Again, along the lines of when this whole thing came out a couple of months ago. What he had to say when he was on the committee, the committee that was put forth to investigate Boko Haram. Hear what he had to say about the United States involvement and what he witnessed and testimonies he heard about their involvement in funding of Boko Haram. Take a look at this very telling interview. I'll be right back.
Real quickly, Prof, I want to get your comments as regards the USAID case. An American congressman has said that monies were funneled to fund groups causing mayhem in Nigeria. What's your take on that, sir?
Well, thank you very much for having me on your program again. Good morning, Rufai. Good morning, Nayo. Good morning, Professor K.
Morning.
I listened, Rufai, I listened to you earlier on this morning, and you say you want facts because really you are not buying into this narrative about USAID funding Boko Haram. Well, I'd like to give you some facts. I served on the Boko Haram committee. Now, 2 plus 2 at times has to be equal to 4. So even if I can't give you 4, but I can give you 2 plus 2, we would then have to come to the conclusion that I'm giving you 4. I served on that committee, and villagers kept telling us that in the middle of the night, helicopters piloted by white people kept landing and offloading guns, goods, and all kinds of and money to these people. Now, villagers they don't even know who these white people are, and they have no reason to lie to us. Now, we made a mistake. When I said some of us on the Boko Haram committee made a mistake. We thought it was the French that were doing this. Now we have an American congressman said, no, it was the Americans who were doing this.
That is very, very shocking. I want to play another clip of the interview, which I think is equally more shocking, that the Nigerian armed forces had Boko Haram in their sight. They had Boko Haram in their view, and they were going to fire and shoot and put them down. But they were ordered by their own officials, by their own command, to stand down. Take a listen to this.
And they not only did that, they also penetrated our armed forces, because behind the scene, our boys would tell us that there were times when they will have Boko Haram people in the sight of their guns, and they will now ask their headquarters for permission to open fire, only for their superior officers to tell them to pull back and not open fire. That shows the extent to which there was penetration and destabilization of our own security forces.
So what's really going on here? Because this whole thing stinks. This is why we say that Africa is plagued with bad leaders. This is why we say that Africa is plagued with corrupt leaders. This is why we say that. But then we're not going to exempt the United States because the United States is corrupt. Because it's the whole snake oil salesman's tactics, right? Where I have a product to sell and I have to create a need for me to sell that product. It's the same old snake oil tactic. The gun manufacturers want to sell guns, so they go in and create a situation, in this case, terrorism, fund the groups, stoke the division, pay off some corrupt officials like they are corrupt also. So they supply arms into those countries. It is why also we've heard reports that these groups, whether it's Al-Shabaab, whether it's Boko Haram, whether it's Al-Qaeda, whether it's ISIS, we've heard reports that these groups have sophisticated weapons. Where are they getting weapons from? Now we're seeing and hearing accounts from credible witness like Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, who says there were villagers whom they interviewed, who said they saw white people come in the middle of the night to drop off guns and sell to these groups. That is very, very that's very, very eye-opening. But it's not news to me because I've been reporting on this for the last 3 years. Have been talking about this on this platform for the last 3 years. And I still remain convicted when I talk about it. It's been the basis of my whole platform. Yes, I've caught flack for it. I would get occasionally people will come on my platform and say, "You're lying. US isn't funding terrorism. You're just trying to make YouTube videos. US is fighting terrorism." And it's sad that occasionally these people have been Africans who come and tell me this because they believe in the so-called good work that the United States is doing. Look at what's going on. Who broke the news? The United States broke the news. They are investigating their own. So hold on a second. So they're saying that our taxes have been going into doing this. Is that what we should have? Yes. The US, so-called USAID fund that the US has been touting all over the place. Taxpayers have been funding. Of course, the taxpayers don't know this. So we're not gonna hold the taxpayers responsible for this. Taxpayers have nothing to do with this. They didn't know that the so-called USAID funds, which many thought were for good deeds, were actually going to fund terrorism in other part of the world. They had no way of knowing this any more than the citizens of those countries. Knowing that their government, when they accept this USAID, hasn't actually been for the so-called aid that it was supposed to be for. It has been, that's just the cover-up story. It's actually been for the funding of these organizations in their own countries. And isn't it sad that you have governments, leaders in those countries that will take money from a corrupt country, get corrupted themselves, so they can allow jihadists to destabilize their country. They're the ones that have to live in that country. They're the ones that have to exist in that country. Allow bombings, bullets, destruction of their own properties in their own country at the expense of their own citizens, their own taxpayers. While the country who's funding it get on the helicopter and then go back to their own country. Isn't that really sad? Thank God that the Creator raised up a man like Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, who's standing up against this situation because he sees the BS. Thank God for the other ones. Assimi Goitia, Gerard Abdulhami Chiani. Thank God for these countries, because the other ones in Africa are a disgrace. The other ones in Africa are a disgrace. Because it will be highly hypocritical for you to hold the United States responsible, and you should, and not hold the countries whose leaders have been collecting, have allowed them, because there's no way this country would go to another country and do such thing if the leaders of that country, of those countries, I should say, didn't allow them to do their corrupt deals in their country. It's not possible for someone to come to your backyard and piss in your backyard and you don't know anything about it. Or worse yet, you not allow it to happen. So it's a question I'm posing to everyone watching me today. Who are we to blame? What say you? Anyway, thank you all for watching. Please like the video, share the content, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you all next time.
Det finns ingen annan där som kan stå här by my side, oh why. Sättet du rör på det får mig att dö för dig baby. För de här yardis, de vill ju bara dra ner oss. Men du är fett och vanlig. På det jag lägger av min tid, jag vill ha dig. Du får mig känna safety. Jag kan nog leda dig baby. Och jag kommer aldrig ändra mig.